For better or for worse, Mr. Chairman, I'm not a stranger either to issues of narcotics distribution nor to issues relating to Iran-Contra. I served for 4 years as a narcotics prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, first under John Martin, who is now a federal judge, and for the bulk of my tenure under now Mayor Rudolph Giuliani. We did not in that office do street-level drug cases. We focused on high-level narcotics trafficking, both in cocaine and in heroin. The largest cases I tried, the last of which was in December of '86, focused specifically on large rings of people. The last case involved elements of Italian organized crime who were making deals with drug dealers down here in D.C., and the sales were ultimately made directly into the African-American community here in the District of Columbia. I was, in that office, Senator, responsible as Deputy Chief of Narcotics for supervising the work of from 20 to 22 lawyers who did nothing but focus on high-level narcotics trafficking cases. Shortly before I left the office in December of 1986, I was named the chief of the narcotics unit by Mr. Giuliani. I left that office, Senator, to work for the Iran-Contra Independent Counsel, Lawrence Walsh. I began my service with him in January of 1987. I was one of the first 7 lawyers hired by Judge Walsh. Let me just quickly sketch some of the things that I did while in that office that I think do bear at least some relevance to the inquiry that my agency is going to begin and that your body is going to be working on. During the early phases of that investigation, a colleague of mine and I focused on allegations that there had been illegal fundraising on behalf of the Contras, and that in particular, certain individuals, most notably Carl Channell and Richard Miller, had worked together with Lieutenant Colonel North in soliciting wealthy American individuals to provide money, large contributions, to the Contras. There was a specific representation by Lieutenant Colonel North and his colleagues that, in fact, the Contras were in desperate need of weapons. They assigned particular dollar values to the weapons and made very elaborate presentations to wealthy individuals. That's all a part of the public record, both with the House and Senate Select Committees as well as that of my office. We early on secured guilty pleas, both from Mr. Channell and Mr. Miller, who pled guilty to, in fact, misusing a tax-exempt foundation to solicit contributions for the Contras and specifically to buy weapons for the Contras. I was, Mr. Chairman, Senators, responsible for coordinating the overall grand jury investigation during the first 2.5 years of Iran-Contra. In approximately the fall of 1987, I headed a team of approximately 7 lawyers and approximately the same number of FBI and other law enforcement agents who were specifically looking at possible criminal misconduct on the part of employees of the Central Intelligence Agency, the Department of State, as well as private individuals who were involved in the resupply network. Out of that team, as I'm sure you recall, came the indictment of former Costa Rican Station Chief Joseph Fernandez, and that case, as you know, was aborted subsequently in the latter stages of 1989 because the Department of Justice, which as you well know was completely separate and independent from our work as the independent counsel, refused to release the documents and declassify the documents that our office needed in order to pursue that matter.
Were you dissatisfied with that?
Very much so.
Now you have the power to get into the inside of that as the Inspector General of the Department of Justice?
I do. Part of the problem, obviously, is going to be framing an inquiry that can be done in some reasonable period of time, and I really want to work with this committee in trying to determine what framing makes sense. So that
we're going to come to that, but here you are, having been an adversary of the Department of Justice. Now you're the Inspector General of the Department of Justice. I'm not suggesting a conflict of interest because you work for the United States, you work for the people of the United States on both occasions.
I certainly do.
How will you be able to proceed on that?
Well, that is currently not within the scope of our investigation. If this committee or others ask us to look directly into this, I will certainly do so. I have to be obviously very careful not to pursue an investigative agenda here. that others may think may derive from trying to settle old scores or probe into something that I have a particular and individual interest in. I just throw that out. I'm happy to have further discussions with you and with members of the committee about
well,
that.
on the surface, it looks to me as if it's relevant, but I don't want to draw any final conclusions at this. I don't want to do it on horseback today.
Thank you. Senator, from January of 1989 through May of 1989, I was one of the 3 courtroom lawyers for the United States of America in the prosecution of Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. As you recall, some of the newspapers I've seen recently suggest that that case ended in an acquittal. It did not. Lieutenant Colonel North was convicted of 3 felonies in that case. His conviction was only reversed subsequently by the Court of Appeals. I was in that office for 2.5 years. I've described in brief detail what my overall responsibilities were. I left that office in October of 1989 and returned to the private practice of law and did that for approximately 4 years. I was nominated in the late winter of 1994 and took office in June 1994 as the Inspector General of the Department of Justice. I have not dealt with an issue since I've been Inspector General. I've dealt with some very sensitive and very important ones that has resonated so clearly both with the Congress and with the American people. When I first became aware of these allegations in mid-September, I obviously wanted to examine what the allegations were. I reviewed the articles in the San Jose Mercury, and it seemed to me that there were enough troubling questions about the points of contact between individuals employed by different components of the Justice Department and the allegations that drew together the CIA and the Contras and the introduction of crack cocaine into South Central Los Angeles that I thought it was very important to launch an investigation. To clarify the record, I did so on my own without being directed by anyone, either inside the department or outside the department.
We compliment you for that, Mr. Bromwich.
Thank you. Since that time, I have spent time, because I think it's important, dealing with the representatives of people in the affected communities to try to assure them that, given my background and the reputation that my office has, that we will do our very best to try to get to the bottom of this and to explore fully what the involvement, if any, of Department of Justice employees was with these allegations. Indeed, the very day that I decided to open the investigation, I met with Congresswoman Waters, who's here today. I subsequently met with her again. She facilitated an introduction to me to Gary Webb, the author of the San Jose Mercury articles, and I have talked with Mr. Webb on subsequent occasions. I then proceeded to talk to other members on both sides of the aisle who clearly had an interest in this matter and having the investigation done properly and well. I met with your counterpart, Senator Specter, Mr. Combest, the chairman of HPSI, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, as well as Mr. Dix. I met with Julian Dixon, who is a senior member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and whose district in California borders on South Central Los Angeles. And I also met with Juanita Melinda McDonald, who is a congressperson, as Ms. Waters is, from South Central Los Angeles. They made me even more aware than I already was of the importance of our investigation and the fact that we were facing deep cynicism and distrust of the federal government and even with the Department of Justice. I just returned last night, Senators, from what for me was an extraordinary trip to South Central Los Angeles. I was invited to do so by Congresswoman Melinda McDonald to meet with some community leaders so that they would have a chance to meet firsthand with the person who is going to be conducting one of the investigations that touches on these issues. I won't say that that trip was roundly endorsed by others in the department. It was an extraordinary trip, but I certainly felt a responsibility to go out there and do whatever I could.
It was not roundly endorsed by others in the department? Was it opposed?
I'd prefer not to talk about that in public.
You brought the subject up.
Okay. It was opposed by some. And while I was out in Los Angeles, I met with a number of people. I met with a group of approximately 30 to 35 community leaders. I met with the mayor of Los Angeles. I met with the membership of the County Board of Supervisors. I met with, yesterday, a group of from 12 to 15 clergymen from the South Central area who I am told represented about 50,000 or so parishioners in South Central LA. And what I tried to tell them is what I'm going to tell you and the American people here today, is that don't rush to any conclusions. What I ask is for people to keep an open mind and let us do our work. The facts and nothing but the facts will drive our investigation and its conclusions. And I don't think anybody at this point is in a position to say whether those allegations are true or they are not true. When I decided to open this investigation on September 20th, I immediately put into place a team, and within a week, we had a very comprehensive documents request that went out to all components of the Department of Justice. We have already started to receive the products of that work, and it looks to be that the documents that the Justice Department has that deal with Meneses and Blandone and Ross and others are in fact quite voluminous. Right now we have a team of 9 or 10 that are assigned to the matter, and I will preempt your question and tell you that in my judgment, will not be enough. And I'm in the process of trying to get additional resources to supplement my team. That really is all I want to say at this point, Senator. I take this investigation and the responsibilities that it imposes on me and my office very seriously. I will only mention that I think the work that we have done in my office since I took office should establish that we are capable of calling the tough ones toughly, and as we see them. We did, I think, the definitive review of allegations relating to the good old boy roundup, around which there were serious allegations of racial misconduct and other kinds of misconduct in a law enforcement related gathering in southeastern Tennessee from 1980 to 1995. We told the whole story there and laid out that in fact some of the worst of the racial allegations were in fact true. We recently completed a review
that was a Department of Treasury matter, wasn't it? Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms?
Well, there were more Treasury Department employees who attended than Justice Department, but early on we had information that there were a number of Justice Department employees attended as well, and I thought it was my responsibility to explore that, even though it wasn't given my publicity.
How did the Treasury Department do on that investigation?
I think their investigation was a less complete one than ours. That's why I refer to ours as, I think, the definitive
They still
study.
haven't admitted to any failings in the Ruby Ridge matter. I don't know if they ever will. Right up to the Secretary of the Treasury.
Is that a question for me?
No, it's a statement. My question was how they did on your investigation. I just wanted to see on one that you ran side by side with them.
The other investigation that I would draw your attention to is one that we completed in June of this year, involving allegations that the Congressional Task Force on Immigration Reform, led by Representative Gallegly of California, was deceived by high-level officials within the Immigration and Naturalization Service who conspired to create a Potemkin village, if you will, a false appearance to facilities at the Chrome Detention Facility and Miami International Airport. We found that, in fact, the deception had taken place and that high-level officials in the INS were responsible for it. We recommended in our report that 13 officials of the Immigration and Naturalization Service be disciplined to some extent, up through and including termination. Those are just a couple of the special investigations that we've done. We also have going right now investigations of the FBI lab, which I'm sure you're aware of, and other matters as well. That's all that I would care to say in this statement, but I'm obviously I'm all too happy to respond to any questions that you might have.